All over the crowd. Here we go. We're ready to go. I think I got almost everybody up here. Okay, we'll gavel in. Welcome to the April Kansas Board of Regents meeting here at Hayes, America. And we thank our wonderful host, Fort Hays State University. It's been wonderful all morning, President Mason. Thank you to you and your team. We're grateful to be here. All right, we'll get started with everybody's favorite part of the meeting, the approval of minutes. Board, you guys received these ahead of time. This is our March 20th and 21st, 2024 meeting. Are there any amendments or corrections? Or if not, I'll hear a motion to approve. You gotta hold it down.
Motion.
All right, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, we're through the minutes. Introductions. Does anybody have any introductions for the board today? President Flanders.
Yes, I would like to introduce a couple of new staff members that we have, some not new, but in new roles. We have Robin Meinhold, who's going to be supporting the board administratively, and we are glad to see her join our team. And as a note, graduated from Fort Hays State University, so back in her home country here. And then I also want to introduce someone who's not new to us, but in a new role. That's April White. She will be our Vice President for Workforce Development. And we're really excited to see what she brings to that area of focus that we have in our agency.
Thank you. Any other introductions for the board? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the chair's report. I'll be short and sweet. Welcome, Robin, and congratulations, April. We're looking forward to it. Welcome back to the homeland. Yes, proud graduate. It's okay for you guys to clap. This is Fort Hays State alumni. Yeah, I'm just so proud of this board and of the universities and 2 years out there and the work that you guys are doing. And I know we're coming up with a little bit more of the legislative session, but I feel like we've collaborated really well through that. And I think we're seeing the value of the product we're putting out there and the work that you guys are doing. I was recently at a Greater Wichita Partnership meeting. Many of you guys know I vice chair that economic development group for Wichita. And we were highlighting the partnership between WSU Tech and USD 259 and the work that they're doing. They have a workforce readiness center there that's specifically focused on the aviation industry. And they were talking about their last class, 100% of them got hired by Textron, which was amazing. They had a 600 person summer camp that they were partnering on for middle schoolers, and it sold out immediately when they signed it up. And they have other workforce readiness centers and things that they're doing, but this partnership with K-12 and that work is really important in our 2 years. And these kids we have coming up, they were talking about a couple that were graduating in the same week, getting their certificates and their associate's degree and their high school diploma all in the same week, and then going straight into the engineering program at WSU. And so that kind of partnership, and when we work together like that, it's a gift to everybody in this state. And so just proud of what I got to see there in my hometown, but I know there's examples of that going on around the state and that work. And I think we got to continue to lean in on our partnerships all the way from high school to 2 years into the 4 years. So I just want to highlight that. It's pretty awesome. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to our president CEO, the one and only Dr. Blake Flanders.
Thank you, Chair Rolfe. I wanted to just highlight, and we did a little of this morning during the council president's meeting, but some of our issues that we see on the forefront with the federal financial aid, and our completion rate for the FAFSA is decreased by 36% when we compare it to the same period last year. That is that really is an area of concern. And we are trying to work together with our institutions to make sure that, particularly at the end of this school year, we get to as many students as possible. I did want to recognize Highland Park High School. Out of all the schools participating in our Apply Kansas statewide campaign, they were selected as the American College Application Campaign's 2023 School of Excellence, based on their efforts with their local Apply Kansas event. So those types of events help our first generation students, which is a group that we really need to be targeting. We're working with our institutions and our student financial aid officers and conducting lunch and learn sessions where students can learn more about financial aid and get the most accurate, up-to-date information. Will be available 3 Thursdays from 12 to 12:45 on April 18th, April 25th, and May 2nd. And we have those resources posted on our website. I would say in the good news category, we have 4 K-State extension offices are now offering FAFSA assistance. And so I know that we talked about that earlier at Gray County, Butler County, Lyon County, and the regional office that covers Republic, Washington, Cloud, and Clay counties. So an extensive network that's now helping students to complete that federal application. And we're hopeful that that will bear fruit. So that concludes my report.
Any questions for Blake? All right, I'd like to welcome up Dr. Van Bergen from K-State to give the report from the Council of Faculty Senate Presidents. Dr. Van Bergen.
So we meet again. Good afternoon, board members. I want to take just a minute. I've been really impressed with the immense hospitality from Fort Hays. They have done a fantastic job. I was greeted by multiple smiling faces starting out in the parking lot all the way through the second floor here. They did a fantastic job. And then they proceeded to blow me away shortly after their guests had lunch. They realized they had a lot of extra food left over, and they invited students up to partake in the leftovers rather than let that go to waste. So I think we owe Fort Hays State a round of applause. Thank you. There's just 2 things I wanted to update the board on this afternoon. The first is an update on the university's progress in approving a common set of criteria for the Board of Regents Faculty of the Year Award. You will recall this is an award that was proposed and is on the website. For one tenured track and one tenured professor from each institution each year. To date, as of today, 5 of the universities have approved the common criteria that the Council of Faculty Senate Presidents put together. Another of the universities is partially through the process. They will complete that, and approval is anticipated on the 30th of this month. We did have one university that it died in committee, so to speak. So it was not approved by one university. Even though that happened, and at this point we don't have unanimous, the Council of Faculty Senate Presidents, our request and our hope is that those universities that did approve this and that are trying to move forward in nominating 2 faculty members to represent their schools in these 2 areas, tenured and tenure track, we are hoping they can continue with this and the board will recognize the importance, the encouragement of awarding this recognition early this fall to those institutions that did agree to the common criteria that was passed. So that's where we stand on that particular issue. The other thing is somewhat brief. Our last official meeting for this year, like others, is a month from today, May 15th, at the board office in Topeka. We are calling that our transition meeting. I don't believe this has been done in the past, but we thought it would be a good start to get all our president-elects at that meeting, brief them, show them around the board office, cover some of the basics on the structure of the board, and just get them off to a running start. So we hope to do that over lunch on the noon hour on May 15th. So that concludes my report. I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? All right, we'll figure out process around your request, and I guess
All
it
right.
would be faculty senates if everybody agreed, right? So,
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
okay, thank you. All right, now I'd like to welcome up Caleb Stout, give the report from the Student Advisory Committee. President Stout.
Good afternoon, Chair, Regents, Presidents, and Chancellor. It's great to be with you all again. Thank you to Hayes for hosting us. If you guys have a chance to go check out the Student Center across the Skywalk, look at their student government offices. They are incredible. So probably the best. We were told it's the best view on campus, and yeah, it's really special. So thank you for hosting us, and it really is a beautiful campus. So brief update from what the students talked about today. So we just updated each other on the tuition and fees conversation, what that looks like on each other's campuses, and also kind of just what the processes are in place for reviewing the student fee, how they go about the approval and all of that. And so we just compared and collaborated on that. And then the next thing we talked about was food security. I know previous K-Board meeting, I mentioned the idea of food for fines, which is the ability of repaying or waiving parking violations with a donation to a campus food pantry. And so since then, we've collected parking services data from each of our universities, kind of compared what that looks like across campuses. And the conclusion that we came to was there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all program that works at the universities. But what it did do is it reopened the conversation we'd had throughout the year just about the importance of food security on our campuses. This seems to just be a recurring issue that if there's one thing I hear students interested in, other than athletics, it's food security, at least at K-State and the other universities as well. And so I guess this is just me coming back to the board, hoping to bring it back to your attention and just saying, our terms are pretty short as students. Next time I stand in front of you, I will have a college degree and I will be on my way down the next path. But the problem with food security remains. And so as students, we have a passion for it. We want to help you guys however we can, but we're pretty limited on what we can do. So just bringing back to attention the importance of food security across our campuses. So with that, that's really all I have. So I will stand for questions.
Any questions for President Stout? We appreciate you bringing that back up, and we appreciate your confidence in how you're going to do on your finals. So next time
Thank
you'll
you.
have your degree. That's good. Good luck, Caleb. You've done a great job this year. Thank you. Let's get reports from our standing committees. Regent Lane, Academic Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And let me add my appreciation to Fort Hays State for their hospitality. Our Academic Affairs Committee actually started with Provost Arnsdorf highlighting for us some special things that are happening on campus. And so we appreciate knowing about those and all the different activities that are occurring that we may be able to partake in. We did not have a meeting on April the 4th, and today focused on two broad topics. One, we approve the rubric for the academic year 2024 performance reports to be utilized, and then spent the remainder of our meeting discussing our program review report process. Just to remind the board, the campuses will be submitting their results of their on-campus review on Friday of this week. BAS will then be meeting on April the 30th. And again on May 15th to review the recommendations from each of our campuses. We will then have a meeting on June the 4th, our regular scheduled academic affairs meeting, to review once again and make our plans for recommendations that will come to the full board on June 19th for approval. I just want to say the campuses have worked extremely hard on this process. Their campus processes and procedures are quite impressive, and I look forward to seeing their recommendations and working through the remainder of the board's process. We also had an update from Dr. Monholland on what's happening in academic affairs in general. He highlighted an update for us on math pathways and also talked about the work underway to support FAFSA completion. That work is being led by Misty Knox, and we really appreciate her efforts and the team efforts there. So that concludes, well, no, the final thing is tradition now of academic affairs, I hope will continue into the future, are our good news reports from each campus. I suggested that we create a video of all the good news reports that we've had this year and share those with the public. If someone's questioning the value of higher ed, all they need to do is hear all the great work happening across the system at our universities. And with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
World can always use more good news. I like that. Any questions for Dr. Lane? Okay. Regent Benson, Fiscal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will add my thanks to the chorus of appreciation to our host here at Fort Hays State. Great to be in the land of the Tigers, but I know a lot of work goes into these campus visits, so we really appreciate all the hospitality. Fiscal Affairs and Audit Committee this morning reviewed the information provided to us for the 3 Johnson County Educational Research Triangle, or CERT or JCERT budgets for fiscal year 2025 as a first read. KU Med Center, KU Edwards, and K-State Olathe campuses must have their budgets approved for the following year according to state statute authorizing the 1/8 cent Johnson County sales tax. The board will review the budgets at the May meeting after the JCERT authority has approved them, which is scheduled for next Monday. It was highlighted this morning that the JCERT money has been instrumental in launching KU's Clinical Research Center, helping them bring in other funding for clinical trials. So they've now reached a point where they are reliant for only 1/3 of their revenues and the rest coming from pharmaceutical companies and other parties. It has multiplied the economic activity at the KU Med Center across the region. Mary Damewood, Finance Director with KU Med Center, explained how the Center for Clinical Research uses the revenues to provide early phase trials, now serving over 600 patients every year. And clinical revenue has increased from less than $1 million to now more than $12.3 million. So great progress in that respect. KU Edwards has seen enrollment growth of about 20% per year in their JCERT programs, such as IT, health sciences, and organizational communication, with JCERT programs accounting for just over 51% of the courses at the Edwards campus. Where they see a program not getting adequate interest from students, they will adjust, and when a program becomes self-sustaining or is moved to another academic unit, it is unwound from that JCERT support. Vice Provost Day also explained how they work with a workforce advisory board to garner industry input on what new programs are needed or new curricula that might be needed. Dean Ben Wolf of the K-State Olathe campus explained how they have a dual mission for academics and research, with their faculty and staff almost evenly split between the two functions. He highlighted their activity in animal health, food security, and advanced manufacturing. They're focusing more and more on non-credit and bachelor's programs, seeking to get 500 student enrollment at the Olathe campus. They are seeking to diversify their revenues to be more sustainable over the long run and are strategically using their JCERT reserves. They're looking to reach $3 million per year for external research revenues and to strengthen the local industry partnerships in the context of the K-State strategic plan. In our committee meeting this morning, we talked about how to improve coordination among the three campuses. As their functions don't overlap, we feel like they already do coordinate very well together, and we're glad to hear that they're striving to be even more strategic in the future. Our request to the three campuses was to find more ways to collaborate to make the best use of that JCERT funding. The committee also reviewed the items on today's board agenda related to fiscal affairs. We walked through the property purchase that K-State is proposing that will be before the board this afternoon. And finally, Mr. Chair, Director Bristow explained that the new space analysis tool will launch this spring from the last 2 years of work with consultants that will serve the universities in their space management decisions moving forward. And thank you as always to Elaine for the summary. And with that, be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Blake? Okay, we'll move on to governance, which is me. The governance committee met this morning and heard a second reading of a draft policy amendment concerning diversity, equity, and inclusion statements in admissions and faculty hiring. The committee approved the amendment for the board's consideration this afternoon. The committee also reviewed the board's building naming policy. It approved a 3-year subscription for the business intelligence software used to run public portals such as the Building a Future dashboard. And it received a campus safety and security report from Fort Hays State University. I must say, I feel quite safe right now after that. Lastly, the committee recessed into executive session to discuss fiscal year 2025 CEO compensation. Any questions on governance? Okay. And before we go into consent agenda, I just want to recognize we do have a former regent from the region, Alan Schmidt, here. If he'd stand up and just be recognized for his service in the 4 years he's been. Makes some mighty fine wine, if you're wondering. All right. The consent agenda. Do I hear any discussion, or I take a motion to approve our consent agenda for this meeting?
I would move for approval.
Got a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, we're through consent. Now to our first item on discussion. Chad Bristow, if you'll come up, we'll receive our capital improvement requests and 5-year plans for fiscal year 2026. This is a first read for all of us.
All right. Thank you, Chair Rolfe. This fiscal affairs discussion item 1, as you just introduced, is page 24 of the board book. And with this first read of the FY26 capital plan, just want to point out that the board has a longstanding process to review capital. Review the capital request each spring. And that is illustrated in the slide that you have. Regents, you should have these slides in front of you, and it's shown on the screen. Also, before we get started, I just want to make sure that you've also received tabular information with all of the projects that each university has advanced on their FY26 plan, as well as a description of each of those projects. So you'll have that for reference as well. This slide that you have on the screen right now represents the campus planning and budgeting process as is supported by board policy and by statute. The board requires a campus master plan to be submitted from each university and reviewed and approved every 10 years. And best practice is to also update that regularly. So each university now by board policy will bring their master plan to the board, presented every 3 years, but updated every 10 years. So you'll see updates or at least a presentation for each board member to understand where they're at. Interestingly now, though, we're in a cycle where a lot of the universities are updating their plans, have just updated or will be. And I'll just list the status of each university and their campus master plan updates. Wichita State University sometime this spring or summer, will bring their completed campus master plan for review and approval. KU Lawrence is in the process of completing theirs, probably this fall is what we understand. We'll see that, as well as the medical center's master plan. Fort Hays State has completed a good portion of their master plan, but I think is also working on a digital master plan. So possibly later this year or sometime in that duration, you'll see that for review and approval. K-State is just kicking off their process. And so probably late 2025, early 2026, that update will be before you. And Emporia and Pittsburgh are both in the process of getting that started. So look forward to their campus master plan updates in 2025. So the reason that that's important is the capital improvement plans are typically developed as a result of the campus master plan update. So what you have in front of you is a list of projects that have either been funded and prioritized and will be executed in the next year or next 5 years, or potential projected projects that the universities should resources become available, they may complete those. And so what you see in this cycle is in March, the universities submit their lists to the board. April, the board does a first read, gets acquainted with what the priorities are. May, the board typically approves the plan, and then the board office submits under one cover all the institutions' capital plans to the division of the budget. And during the interim session, the universities all present to the Joint Committee on State Building Construction by statute. And then, of course, during the session, the budget is approved. And you'll see in the middle of this diagram, all through that cycle, the universities, as priorities are shifting and focus is changing or opportunities present themselves, the universities bring amendments to their capital plan, to their current capital plan, if they move something from out years into the current action stage. So once a project is approved, it takes a whole course of, becoming real, and those capital improvement projects on state property all follow the same path, no matter what the funding source is. The delivery method could be a little different, but the board approves a program statement, which is a description of the project, moves on to design the project. A design development approval is required by board policy, and all that really means is the project still the same project that the board approved at the program stage, followed by state processes for code review and permitting, bid for construction depending on the funding source, different procurement methods available there, construct the project, the state inspections are required, and then of course the building is given a certificate of occupancy, and that completes the cycle there. So for this year, what you have in front of you for the FY26 capital plan, this bar graph basically breaks out by university the projected potential expenditures. And so what this represents, of course, is projects that could be completed from FY26 through FY31. Then we look at the projects per the categories that are established by the division of the budget. This looks at the same expenditures by those project types. So you see the long bar, you can see that the majority of the projects that are being considered or aspired to are new construction and additions, followed by remodeling and rehabilitation and repair. Think of those two categories, especially as capital renewal and maintenance. And then very small amount of raising and demolition, proportionate to the other priorities. But we all know that in the last couple of years, those projects have been pretty instrumental in terms of avoiding deferred maintenance. So proportionately here, I just want to show that the universities have a substantial portfolio of buildings. I think everybody knows that, but this is a graph that compares the mission critical buildings on the right compared to the entire portfolio of mission critical buildings and non-mission critical buildings. And it's just good to keep in mind the magnitude of the amount of buildings that needs to be maintained. You can see here on the mission critical replacement value. If you replaced all the mission critical academic buildings as they exist right now, the estimated cost is $8.3 billion. If you replaced all of the buildings on state grounds, so including all of the housing, athletics, student union, and all other non-mission critical buildings, the estimated cost is $13.2 billion. That's 1,149 buildings compared to the 498 mission critical buildings. Now, if you understand how much is out there and how much is needed to serve the missions of these institutions, you can also appreciate that the problem that presents itself is that over time, it takes a lot to maintain these buildings. You can build a building, it takes a lot more money to maintain and operate that building over its lifetime. And this is an illustration that one of our consultants created for us when they presented in December that we've modified a little bit. And I just want to define a few things here so that we can all have the same understanding of what we're talking about when we say deferred capital renewal and maintenance. What you'll see going back to in this graph, the 1920s, is the first bar there is the annual maintenance that needs to be funded to maintain the buildings. And each year, the amount of funding that's available typically hasn't met the need. And so every year there's some things that the facilities teams would have liked to do that they couldn't afford, and that rolls over to the next budget cycle and the next decade. And as long as that goes, as long as the funding doesn't meet the need, we call that deferred renewal and maintenance. And it accrues over time, of course, exponentially. And the cumulative backlog, or the red bars, essentially represents that deferred maintenance. And you can see it in an abstract way here. It's estimated at $1.3 billion currently by our latest report in 2023. And of course, that is a conceptualization of the problem. When you're on a campus, of course, you see it in a more concrete manner. You see windows that have lost their air seal. You see roofs that leak and stained ceiling tiles. You feel it in a building when the dehumidification isn't working or the air handlers aren't functioning. There's a lot of different ways that you can experience what this represents too. And that's why it's important that what the board has started in this current facilities renewal initiative going back to 2019 and 2020 is so important. Our consultants have said in December, as they reported to the Fiscal Affairs and Audit Committee, that through all of their work across the country with universities over the decades, it's unique that this board is working with the universities to try to tackle this issue. And what this represents is how that initiative is working. I don't know if you can read all of this, but it's a multifaceted approach to trying to address this project, or trying to address this problem. In 2020, assessment of hundreds of buildings happened. That set the standard to develop a facilities database. You have to know what you have. So all the universities are in the process of working hard to get all of their buildings assessed by a third party to have an objective view of what each building represents, get it into the database, understand what systems are in that building and what needs might need to be addressed, and the estimated costs over time. You know what you've got, you know what condition it's in, and you have a good sense for how to budget what you need to prioritize for that building in the future. Then the board in 2021 established a new policy framework and basically flipped the script on how renewal and maintenance is being funded. In the past, there's been the stability of the Educational Building Fund. You can count on it, you know what it's going to be, and you divvy it up between the universities, and all of the facilities teams and tradespeople and building services, everybody involved, stretch those dollars and do as much as they possibly can with those dollars. But what the board challenged the universities to do is say, what assets do you need to serve your mission? And once you define mission critical buildings that you need to serve your mission, use a best practice target and fund the maintenance and the upkeep of those buildings at that level. And so what was assigned was a 2% annual reinvestment based on the replacement value. So we talked earlier, 8.3 billion. 2% of that 8.3 billion needs to be reinvested annually such that deferred maintenance doesn't continue to accrue. A lot of maintenance and a lot of needs has accrued, but the big idea here is don't keep adding to that. Get to a point where you're not deferring maintenance. So what you see on the right-hand side of this slide, and I apologize, you probably can't read the text, but there's a kind of a twofold approach here. In FY23, the legislature and the governor supported additional funding for facilities, and that was divided between capital renewal and maintenance and demolition. And so the universities prioritized 20 buildings that have been either raised or planned to be raised. And so what this represents is increasing the annual expenditure on renewal. So that's the bottom graph. You can work on the backlog by spending more every year, and you can potentially take buildings that are obsolete, aren't going to serve the mission after all the evaluation that the universities do to identify what buildings they can divest of, and you take that deferred maintenance off the top. So you're working on this problem from a couple of different angles, and over time, that is going to address this issue. It's a journey. It is not going to be solved in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, but this is the way that this initiative can tackle this over time and make a real difference. And one thing I would say about this is the universities all have a lot of success stories that they've shared on our various tours. I'm sure you've seen and heard different things too, but I'll just share. Dave Rao at the medical center just yesterday was saying how when this first started, he and his team looked at this as this is just a lot of extra work for us. How are we going to do our job? But it's hard enough and try to tackle this. And now he feels like it's one of the best things that's happened to them. They can use this information to validate all the bids that they have. They dip into it constantly, and they package up project scopes, and they compare it to what vendors are sending them. It's become a real reference for them. And I would also point out for KU Med, we'll be having a physical plant and facilities planning meeting. We do this annually at each campus. We rotate. Well, it's at the Med Center this year. They're just finishing up their Applegate Energy Center project, which was about a $11 to $12 million renewal boiler replacement there on the medical center campus. And that was the first project that referenced the cost estimating system from our database. And it's held true a couple of years later as they've completed that. So, that has helped package the projects that you see on these 5-year plans and define what those projects might be cost-wise. I'll also give kudos to Dana Cunningham, the university architect here at Fort Hays. He was instrumental in starting as back in 2020, 2021, defining the cost factors of our national cost estimating system. RS means construction cost data is what we reference, and calibrating that for Kansas so that we understand when you look at the database, you see an air handler or some other building system, you kind of know what cost-wise that represents in terms of a project as you advance it into the budget cycle. So again, everybody has contributed to this. I would like, if I could, just take a couple more minutes. I mean, every campus has a great story like this. I mean, Mark Reisky has shared that already in just a few years of additional funding, they have a reduction of service calls. They can measure that palpably with that, when it rains, they're getting less calls from leaky roofs and wet ceiling tiles. They're getting less cold calls from HVAC projects, that have renewed the systems in buildings, making it more comfortable for students and staff to do their work. Emporia had a great story. Just a few years ago, they were renting a chiller. They had a decentralized approach to infrastructure on their campus. And when a system would fail, there was no other way to address that. There's lead time issues. You've got to rent something to make a building habitable and climate controlled, rent a chiller. Now here they are. And after everybody knows, after your approval and review of various projects, they've got a centralized chiller infrastructure strategy. They're taking buildings down, replacing buildings, it's a great example of what this initiative has supported on each of the campuses. And Pittsburgh has a campus consolidation project that you'll see. It's been on this plan before, but they are moving forward with this in this fiscal year and this next cycle, taking a couple of buildings down, doing replacement, a lot of other exciting things there too. But they've got their own campus consolidation. I know I'm forgetting somebody here. Wichita's got the Student Success Center. And that was a great first, I think that might have been one of the first projects that really teed up, hey, you consolidate a centralized project at the center of campus for student success, consolidate programs and departments into a single building, and take offline 5 buildings that you really don't have a future plan for, divest of that. The biomedical center campus also kind of sets a chain reaction like that into play for them. K-State, of course, the Ag Master Plan, great example with the Call Hall, Weber Hall, and those projects, demolition, replacement buildings. It's a great story. So I just wanted to highlight those. You see those projects and you see those amendments all through the meetings, but to kind of coalesce them together as representation of the board's facilities renewal initiative is really what it's all about. So with that, I will move on to say, this is a graph that represents the appropriations that we've received that really funded and kicked off the facilities renewal initiative, FY23, FY24, and 25. The appropriations, 35 million, 20 million, 20 million, and the 10 million, and now this year, 5 million for demolition, as well as to highlight that the Campus Restoration Act has been sent to the governor's desk and represents a multi-year approach for funding this initiative. And so you can see the light blue bars there in this kind of the center of this graph gives the universities a more stable platform to budget and strategize and prioritize these projects over a longer period of time, and helps them be a little more strategic and long-term thinking in successive moves there. As you get to projects that replace buildings or take a building offline, or you do a heavy renovation on a building, that takes several steps, swing space, consolidation, and this long-term approach really supports a better stable platform to make those long-term plans. And then one other slide here, just to highlight the metrics of the first couple of years of the initiative. You can see on the right-hand side of this graph, it represents that first 20 buildings. Now, again, that's 20 buildings of 1,149 buildings. Mission critical, there's just under 500 buildings. So you're talking about a small number of buildings, but buildings that the university have identified as these buildings aren't going to be needed to serve our mission. They're outdated. They're beyond repair. We can go ahead and take these offline and free a site up or free funds up to do something better for the students and for the institutions. So you see the 20 buildings. The universities also are thinking that based on their master planning and campus planning, that there might be another 40 buildings that they can identify as obsolete. And that represents a avoidance of that first 20, $80 million of deferred maintenance was avoided just in those first 20 buildings. And that second group of buildings could be as much as $250 million of deferred maintenance avoided. Put that into context, right now there's $1.3 billion of deferred maintenance estimated. So that's a pretty big chunk of that backlog liability. And then finally, on the right-hand side, the yellow graph represents the amount of area or campus footprint that's been reduced by taking some of those buildings offline. So all in all, it's as much as 1.5 million square feet. And what that potentially does is helps other buildings be focused on and prioritized for renovation, consolidates departments and programs in different ways, and hopefully utilizes spaces a little more optimally, and potentially opens up the potential for replacement buildings. There's a lot of different considerations that can be made as this progresses comes into fruition. And so finally, with all of that, I would say that there are a few recommendations that come with this first read for the board's consideration. One is to approve the university's FY 26 capital improvement request and 5-year plans as they've submitted them, and contingent on 2 things. One is a commitment to the sustained progress of the board's facilities renewal initiative, as we've just talked through all the various factors of, but most importantly, maintaining the objective of a 2% maintenance assessment, reinvest 2% of the replacement value of the mission critical buildings every year moving forward, so that you can keep pace and keep the liability and the backlog of the renewal needs at bay. And finally, each university will bring their updated campus master plan to the board this year and next year, as we talked about the timeline and the schedule anticipated, and put the 5-year plans, and they'll be updated by that time. There'll be amendments, put those into the context of their campus master plan to show how each of those projects is important to their long-term vision for their future campus priorities. So with that, apologize for being long-winded, but there's a lot to highlight. Be glad to try to answer any questions.
We have a lot of buildings. We appreciate your passion on this, and it's important to be highlighting the wins and the return on investment on this, which are outstanding. Questions or comments from the board? This is the first read. There's no action necessary.
Chair Rolfe, I did have a quick question. I apologize if it's in here because it may be. The 1.3 billion of deferred maintenance, that's on critical mission buildings.
Yeah, yes.
Do we
Yes.
have any idea what the deferred maintenance liability would be on the non-critical mission buildings?
Regent Johnson, I would answer that generally for the universities. I would say the universities probably have a sense for that, but currently we don't have that we can just pull from the database. That is in process. I would also add, board policy does require that all of the buildings on state property have a third-party facilities condition assessment by 2027. And that is a step towards, I think, what you're interested in there. Everything on state ground really should have a representation in the database, every single building, every single system, so that we can understand and give you a more accurate and consistent measure of what all the buildings replacement value and renewal needs would be. But we don't right now. So each university probably could provide that in the various ways that they could estimate that, but it's not, it won't be able to provide that as a report just yet from our database.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, Nalima.
Chad, thank you. I'm thinking back to, with respect to the 2% assessment, I'm thinking back at a chart that I believe I've seen that identifies the dollar amount of that assessment over, what, 5 or 6 years. Are you tracking with me on that topic?
Yes.
And what I remember, one of the things I remember about that is that the available funds, EBF, far understated the needed funds. So there's a funding gap, significant funding gap. My question is, how far does assuming the governor signs the $20 million demolition or facilities fund, how much does that reduce the gap / how much gap remains that the universities will have to fulfill out of their other resources.
Regent Winter, I can take a stab at that. If I could, can I focus on 2028, which would be the first year by board policy that would take you to that 2% goal? You know, there's that gradual increase. And if I'm looking, and I'm going to be making a generalization and an estimate here, provided the Campus Restoration Act Fund, which would be 30 million, there's a match component to that. So the university match, you know, let's say that's 25 million because demolition wouldn't require a match. So, and projecting the educational building fund and giving credit to the universities for the in-house funding that they use for their facilities. I think that we look out and we say, and this is in today's dollars, so a little bit of adjustment there, but I want to say that we're about in the ballpark of 20 million or so shy of what the calculated maintenance assessment would be in general numbers. If you stacked all of those funding sources on top towards that 2% goal.
And do you recall what year that gap starts to exist? If maybe it exists already, but taking into account what's on the governor's desk, what's that gap going to be? And more importantly, where I'm going is how do we fill it? How do we solve that funding gap that is, as you say, out there?
Yeah, so the gradual increase to the 2% starts to get more steep here in the next couple of years. And so that does start to put additional pressure on the universities here soon. But I would say based on everything that we're seeing now and projecting out, what I'm seeing is not until 2028 do you not hit the target of 2%. You know, we're getting additional funds. If you include the educational building fund, which right now we don't count because it doesn't count as the match. But if you said, hey, how much resource are the universities putting towards facilities, and you included the educational building fund in that calculation, then I would say it's 2028 before you have a shortfall.
And have we done any planning with respect to you, whether it's in your mind only or a larger group? Have we done any planning about what to do about that 2028 problem?
There have been a lot of discussions and we've heard a lot of different perspectives, but I don't know that we've got a singular defined plan of how to do that. I think
President Flanders has a thought, Chad.
Yeah, one thing I think that we need to do is clearly we need to address this gap from both ends. And one of that is more aggressive tear down. And so in order to do that, I've had Chad look at this to say, how could we include the cost of swing space into a demo project? Because so many times you can't do a demo project if you don't have a place to put people. So little things like that can help. We're going to have to address it on both ends. And that, you know, it is an issue. We're just to say without the legislature and governor's help, we wouldn't be where we are today in terms of the positive place we are. So I want to be sure we thank them for all that support.
Agreed. Well, I won't play lawyer anymore and lead down this road, but if we get to 2028 and nothing else happens, we see that funding gap. My concern is, as far as I can imagine, the only place to go get that money for that funding gap is from general use operating funds. Do you know of any other place the universities could go to narrow that gap?
One method, let's say, that we have considered is leveraging a variety of funds for projects, replacement projects. So one thing we could do is start to look at the equation and make it a little more nuanced and sophisticated for when you take buildings offline, when you replace buildings, when do you start to apply the 2%? This is a general approach to try to get to 2% to stem the tide of the mounting deferred maintenance. But I think as things become more strategic and as President Flanders just mentioned, taking buildings offline and fully appreciating all the steps that it takes to do that. There may be a more nuanced approach that maybe certain types of buildings need, this percentage of annual reinvestment. So I don't know in terms of just adding the money to reach a goal that is a rule of thumb or a best practice. I wonder if as that approaches and as the assessment of understanding the situation, begins to say, hey, where are we? Where are we going? I do wonder if that's when you sharpen the pencil and say, hey, a lot of good progress has been made. What's working, what's not working, and then recalibrate that and then try to figure out exactly what your goal is. These are projections and budgetary. It's directionally in the right direction. So not trying to move the bar there, but I will say if we're getting that close to our goal, that's a success. And we need to continue to refine the process, I would say at that point. And maybe it means you need more in some cases. But maybe it means that you've gotten a certain amount of success and sophistication and understanding exactly what you need. And then maybe you recategorize certain targets. So not the answer to your question, but it's a thought that emerges as you're starting to lay that out.
That actually is, you helped me move this along. And I've said this before, but we've made remarkable progress, assuming the governor signs that bill. We will have done tremendous amount of work. But we still face a 2028 cliff. And I think we need to be mindful of that because we're going to have to figure out a way to allow the universities and the board to prioritize where that money comes from. Because I can't imagine it's going to be a good idea if we get to 2028 and we really do have to find $20 million or $30 million for buildings. The only place it can come out of is other general use funds, student scholarships, compensation, research dollars. That would be a bad day if we get to a point and we have to start cutting tuition programs, salary programs, research programs. I don't want to get in a situation where we have these beautiful buildings, but we have nobody inside of them because we can't afford to pay, help the students with tuition. I'm done.
Yeah.
Regent Prasker?
I just wanted to, I'll keep it quick in terms of my comment more than, I agree with Regent Winter about what happens when we get to that date and then we have. So I was looking at how do we make our buildings more of assets than liability and maybe try to use more green material within the buildings. How do we create storage for energy? Use technology to measure how much energy that the buildings are actually consuming. These are relatively cheaper options where we can assess our buildings better and maybe reduce the maintenance in moving forward and not do the same procedure we have been doing year after year, because there's a lot of technology and a lot of emphasis on how we can build more green buildings for less maintenance in future. So
definitely. And Chair Rolfe, if I could add to that, Regent Prasker, I would say that increasingly the universities are looking at sophisticated technologies in terms of controls and energy storage. That's a feature of a lot of the projects that are on these plans right now. And so not only are they taking advantage of that to reduce operating costs, they're also taking advantage of that to try to figure out how to maintain the campuses, operate them in the future. You have a lot of people, a lot of people who are retiring, have dedicated decades to the universities, and now everybody's exploring ways to operate with less people and utilize technology, leverage some of these, and not to mention it's also, students are interested in everything that you're talking about. And so engaging students by campus development, there's just so many different layers there that's beneficial. And one other thing, if I could, I kind of glossed over in the slides, but back to Regent Winter's point, I don't want to give the impression that, I mean, the point that Regent Winter and Regent Prasker made about, where do these costs come from? I think maintaining a rigorous and assertive posture on this is the right thing to do for the foreseeable future. I mean, decades. This took many, many decades. This has to be maintained consistently for many, many more decades to address the issue. So one aspect of board policy is that because we saw the graph that showed the potential for many new buildings to happen in the next 5 years. We've worked with Gordian, a consultant who basically provides the database and the facilities condition assessments, and created a very comprehensive maintenance and operations template that the universities are already starting to use. You've seen program statements that reference these projected costs so that each university can have a consistent and as accurate as we can understand now budgetarily what it's going to take to maintain that building over its lifetime and operate that building. So when the program statements for the projects come to your desk and you're reviewing what the initial costs are estimated to be and what the future cost outlay to maintain those buildings are, we have a consistent and thorough understanding of just what that's going to be over the life of those buildings. So that's going to inform what amount of funds is needed over time as that develops, as those portfolios change over time, buildings are replaced, new buildings come online. This isn't just take care of these buildings and take a few offline and then go. It's think comprehensively. If you replace a building, now that building's in the database, and we're going to be very rigorous and detailed in understanding what that future of that building is. So it's a new day, and looking forward, everything is in a new light in terms of this initiative.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Regent Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to say, Chad, that it's a pleasure watching you talk about chillers with that big smile on your face. And we appreciate you shepherding us forward on this. My question relates to what you were just talking about. I appreciated on slide 8, the accountability box talked about financing for maintenance as well as operation costs. So in that level of detail that you just referenced, is there can we anticipate understanding the finance plan around the maintenance?
Regent Lane, I think that aspect, and I'm just thinking generally, so if anybody has other thoughts on this, I think we have started to think, at least in COBO meetings, about some policy around gift funding and indebtedness. We saw KDFA and Jim McMurray offer some suggestions last meeting. So I wonder if a position or a thought about what you're just talking about there maybe fits into some of those other policy topics around funding capital improvements. I don't mean to be too general or vague about that, but that's a thought in response to your point.
Well, I appreciate that. I would encourage those conversations to continue to unfold, because I think what would really help future governing bodies to understand how those maintenance costs are actually being paid for, and less of it's just built in. Well, how is it built in? What does that look like? That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the board? 13.2 billion of replacement value of assets. That's really a striking number. So it's certainly worthy of the level of discussion we've brought to it today. The work you're doing, Chad, we appreciate it. Also, I know this is very complex. I feel like every presentation, the way you treat the graphics to tell the story helps simplify that for people like me that are visual learners. So I appreciate your work on that, because I feel like you're always trying to make it better. I also, just in response to some of the questions, want to just highlight again, I think part of what's making our system work really well right now is that we're very collaborative. We're collaborative, universities to board, universities board with legislature and governor, and universities with themselves. And we're trying to create a climate in which we share ideas and work towards solutions together when we can identify problems. This is an example of that. And I think just highlight that it'd be important as we move forward year in, year out, as I think we've been demonstrating up to this point. We're going to keep looking at this, examining it, trying to figure out the best way to move in, recognizing that facilities and deferred maintenance can be dynamic, as sometimes it feels static when you're looking at big numbers, but year in and year out, as we're thinking about space utilization, as programs change and as enrollments change and as communities change, and what the marketplace wants, things move and priorities change, and sometimes hotspots emerge that weren't forecasted. And so the goal of this program was never to create a moment in time where universities have to choose between scholarships and buildings, but to lay it out in a path that as budgets rise for our universities, that we start taking a part of that increase and putting it aside towards taking care of the assets that we have in place, that the taxpayers and the government are expecting us to maintain and care for. I think it's also important just to highlight that in this discussion, we're doing a lot of work and getting a good ROI now, but it will truly be the people sitting in this room 20 years from now that are thanking us for the work that we're doing now. So I want to thank the teams on the campuses, thank the leadership that you guys are taking this seriously, you're being creative, and you're moving forward with great speed. And I do believe the legislature and the governor are seeing the value of the work you're doing. And I think it's really nation leading. So thank you guys for your work. Chad, thanks for the vision and energy you've brought to this. And board, thank you guys for all that you do. And with that, I'm gonna call us into our first break. You got a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back in action. Thank you guys very much. Yours. All right, here we go. All right, we are, if you're joining us, we are in section 6 of our agenda, item 2, a request to purchase land, Kansas State University. I'd like to welcome President Linton to the stage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the board. So I make reference to page 31 in the board notebook, where the request here is that Kansas State University is requesting approval to purchase a parcel of land from the KSU Foundation. So this is a 1.1 acre parcel. It's actually located at 1615 Anderson Avenue in Manhattan. And we are intending to purchase that for $3 million, which is under the highest appraisal. This slide just shows this parcel of land shown here in the shaded in red. The difference here is that building that's shown here on the slide no longer exists. That building used to house our global campus, and that building was taken down several years ago. So it would be just be for the purchase of that land. If you're looking at this slide, on the left-hand side would be the parking lot to Houlihan's and to the Holiday Inn, and then Martin Luther King Boulevard just on the left-hand side of that. And I think there's probably 2 questions that have surfaced over the last couple of weeks relative to this request. First is, why is K-State looking at purchasing this land? And the second one is, why are we paying the KSU Foundation for the property? So the first, why are we buying? This is really, we think, very strategic. In many ways, Kansas State University is landlocked on this part of campus. And to be able to have an opportunity to be able to acquire this precious piece of land, we think is very important. Also, we should note that to the left-hand side of this land, with the parking lot and Houlihan's and the Holiday Inn, that is also land that we plan to purchase in the future. It's currently under a 13-year land lease, but the idea is to be able to purchase both pieces of land so that we have that entire corner, which is catty corner to the Alumni Center. Of course, the future development of this property and any use that would be involved within would be a part of our master planning process that we're working on completing by 2025. So why are we paying the foundation for the property? I think we probably should all recognize that the KSU Foundation is a separate 501c3, and they, like Kansas State University, have their own fiscal oversight and management of its specific expenditures, revenues, and investments. This is an investment that they have made that we wish to purchase. The revenues from the sale of this parcel of land will provide adequate cash flow that the foundation needs in order to be able to build out the Edge Collaborative District on the other side of campus. And the reason that they wish to sell this land at this point in time is that there's a cash flow need for the KSU Foundation for the Edge Collaborative District. Historically, it's not uncommon to be able to have exchanges of land, either purchased by the university or sold by the university to and from the foundation. As an example, we sold a piece of land to the foundation 2 years ago to be able to support our ag initiative project that we have from a cash flow perspective, and which enables them to be able to build out the Edge Collaborative District on the other side of town. So hopefully this has addressed some of the questions that have been asked about this land purchase. I'll stand for any questions that anyone has.
All right, I know in committee this got an exhaustive set of questions, but are there further questions or comments from the board? Before we vote on it, President Lynn, I'm going to vote for this, but I just encourage you. I know when I was looking at this, there is a land over on the other side of the Holiday Inn and all that that's available. And I just encourage you, as you go back to transact on this with Foundation, to urge them to consider doing one transaction over this now instead of parsing it out over time. I think as the fiscal agent for K-State University, I really encourage you as president to go back and have that conversation with Foundation.
I will do that. Yeah, I will do that.
And with that, is there a motion to approve or any further discussion?
I would move for approval.
Okay, I've got a motion. Do I have a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, John Ury, Governance Act on Amendment to the Board Policy Statement.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to apologize. I did not prepare any graphics.
Just go ahead and use mine.
This issue starts on page, or is on page 32 of your materials. So this legislative session and last legislative session, the legislature has had discussions around diversity, equity, inclusion practices in higher education. So something that the governance committee looked at was a policy in part that would partially address that or in response to that. So this would provide that no state university shall, on its applications for admissions or hiring, reappointing or promoting a faculty member, require statements pledging allegiance to or support for or opposition to diversity, equity, inclusion, and nothing in the policy shall prohibit the university from complying with federal or state laws, regulations, grant requirements, or similar measures. This was had a first read last month in governance and then a second read this morning, and the governance committee voted unanimously to forward that to the board for consideration this afternoon.
Thank you. And I'll give a little background here as the chair of the board and chair of governance also. You guys remember last year, this conversation came up and that began the conversation with the legislature. And we looked at it in what would be the off season for the legislature, but for us in the summer and fall, and continued conversations and recognized their points around this employment practice and admissions, around requiring statements on the application process before there's even an interview process, and decided as a group that this was not something we want to practice anymore. And mostly it's not been in practice over the course of the last year. And so this is formalizing that into our policy. It also is congruent with the bill that's come forward that's in front of the governor now, that would say that we can't require these things, these statements on applications for admission or for employment. So this is, again, our good faith effort in trying to listen to the legislature as they listen to the people. It's a concern they brought up. It's not something central to our practices around wanting student success and trying to fulfill our promises to people when we invite them onto our campuses. So I'll make a motion that we approve this as presented. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. All right, now I'd like to welcome up the one and only Ellie Oliver to give us the up to the minute legislative update. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Rolfe. Good afternoon, Regents. Just wanted to give you a quick update on what's happened with the legislature. I know you've received updates weekly, though, from our office on what's happening, but the legislature wrapped up their first adjournment and adjourned April 5th. So they're now on a short break until the end of the month. But there's a few bills that I would like to note regarding higher ed, and lots of moving parts as we went through the session with those bills. But first, just like to note that the appropriations bill passed that includes another over 280 million for higher education, which I think is great for our system. In that bill, though, there's a proviso on our comprehensive grant program for the state universities and also for Washburn University. That grant program is now required a 50-50 split between the public institutions and the private institutions. While we're thankful that the legislature did add $5 million more to that grant program, it will still, with that new 50-50 split requirement, will reduce the amount that'll go to the public institutions by about 2.2 million this next year, which we estimate at approximately 800 scholarships. So 800 students that received a scholarship in the current year we wouldn't have the same amount of funding for next year for those students. Other bills that are currently have been enrolled and are sitting on the governor's desk. One is related to which Chad mentioned briefly before was the Kansas Campus Restoration Act. It'll add $32.7 million over 6 years for both the state universities, Washburn, community colleges and technical colleges to add additional funding for deferred maintenance and rehab and repair. There is a bill, Senate Bill 438. It is kind of a mega bill for the Regents. It includes various updates and revisions to scholarship programs such as our nursing scholarship, our Heroes Scholarship, AOK, and moving our ethnic minority scholarship to a Kansas Education Opportunity Scholarship. But the biggest part of that bill is the Kansas Blueprint for Literacy. And so that legislation is part of that, and it is has been approved by the legislature and is waiting the governor's approval or action. It adds an additional $10 million to our office that will help to not only fund an office of literacy, but also to help train teachers in structured literacy. Finally, related to the policy that you just approved is House Bill 2105, which has DEI prohibitions on student admissions and applicants for employment. On April 29th, the legislature will return for a short omnibus and veto session. The conference committees will come back though that week before to look through any additional appropriations that might be needed for legislation that was passed, such as there was a bill passed for National Guard in their master's program. And so additional funding would be needed for that. So we're hoping that additional funds will be added. Additionally, Senate Bill 291, which relates to cybersecurity and how that impacts our universities and our office, ramping up across the state for state agencies, and the conference committee will continue its discussion there. One final thing that they will review that we're aware of, at least that they talked about that they will review, was the pay plan. The Regent system, they added only 2.5 million, or no, I'm sorry, 2.5% as a merit pool for the Regent system, which is about 13.7 million. The rest of state government, they added 5% as a pay raise for those other agencies, but they're supposed to review that again in omnibus. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Kelly? Comments? All right, how about here on the literacy blueprint? That was a great job, huh? Here on that. That's good. And among other things, important that we're talking to people about that 2.5% going up to 5%. There's still time on that, and we need to lean in hard on that. And also just want to reiterate, you're saying that if it stands, the comp grant stands as it currently is, about 800 students that we've been helping will lose the support that we've been able to offer. And the kind of students we're helping, if we remember last month, the average, the average expected family contribution was low, which was telling us that we were helping folks that needed help. So that's 800 people who need the help, 800 students. So I think it's important we try and work towards solutions on that. I hope the legislature wouldn't want to leave 800 students behind either. So thank you for highlighting those. Again, any questions? Yes, Regent Winter.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but those 800 plus or minus students are all lower income Pell eligible students. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct because it's coming from our side of that 50%. Yeah.
Unfortunate.
Very unfortunate. Questions? Comments? Kelly, you did a nice job.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job. Okay. Before I move to section 7, which is executive session, I want to once again thank our wonderful hosts, President Mason and the Fort Hays State University community and the Greater Hays America community for hosting us these next 2 days. We can't wait to be here on campus and see everything that's going on and interact with folks. We're here to listen. We're here to see. We're here to interact. So if you catch us around here, please engage us and tell us what you think we need to know. So we're grateful to be here. And I'll now entertain a motion for executive session from the one and only, he told me I have a lot of one and only, so I thought I should throw that out there. Regent Carl Ice.
We do have a lot of one and onlys. So process check first. Our session will be in the Stopper Lounge, correct? And then do we come back here and then make another exec? That's the way I read my motion. So, okay. All right. So we will resume in the Stopper Lounge at the appropriate time. Okay. So, Mr. Chair, I would move that the Board of Regents recess into executive session to discuss personnel matter of non-elected personnel. The subject of this executive session is preparation for one or more CEO evaluations, and the purpose is to protect the privacy of the individual board members involved. This session should last approximately 1 hour and shall include the following persons who are either members of the body or who will aid in these discussions. Members of the Kansas Board of Regents, President and CEO Blake Flanders, and General Counsel John Yeary. The open meeting of the board shall resume in the Stoffer Lounge at 4:15.
Well, yeah, by the time we move in there, I
Okay.
would suspect we should be saying 4:30.
All right, we'll say 4:30 then.
Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
All right, I've heard a motion, a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, off to the lounge.
No, I meant our footage makes mine here.
Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I don't.
Today's meeting is adjourned at the Kansas Board of Regents.